In a quiet town where time moves slowly and dreams gather dust, a 12-year-old boy spends his afternoons looking through the window of a forgotten bicycle shop. What began as a quiet yearning for a broken bike turns into something much bigger. A story of quiet endurance, hidden kindness, a gift that will send his sister beyond the limits of her legs, into a summer they will never forget. Some miracles have petals, some come without a name. Before the story begins, we want to know, who was your childhood hero growing up? Let us know in the comments. Greenville was the kind of town that wore its history like an old denim jacket, faded, a little frayed at the seams, but still holding together through the years. It was a quiet southern place where time moved slower than the heat and the sun seemed to hang longer over the cracked sidewalks and rusted mailboxes. Summers here didn't just arrive, they settled in, coating everything with a lazy haze and the scent of magnolia and motor oil. On the edge of Main Street stood a shop that looked like it belonged to another century. Turner & Sons Bicycle Repair. The paint on the sign had chipped away, leaving only faint traces of the original red letters. Dust clung to its windows like memories no one bothered to wipe clean. Inside, among shelves lined with old tires, metal parts, and tools that hadn't been replaced in decades, worked a man as worn and enduring as the shop itself. Otis Turner. Otis was 67, with a spine slightly curved from years spent hunched over workbenches and hearts that never knew how to say goodbye. He spoke little, but when he did, it came out dry, measured, as if each word had to earn its place in the air. Most kids in town didn't dare come near the shop. They said Otis had eyes like a hawk and a mouth like a locked door. But one boy had no fear of silence, not because he was bold, but because he was carrying something quieter than Otis's gruff demeanor. Purpose. 12-year-old Noah Carter started showing up outside the shop sometime in early June. He didn't say much, just stood there, his back to the wall, hands buried in the pockets of worn khaki shorts, his eyes fixated on a single object in the corner window display, a dusty red bicycle with a broken rear seat and a chain that hung like a limp thread. The bike wasn't special by any modern standard. The paint had dulled, the tires sagged slightly, and the metal was dotted with rust like an old map. Yet Noah came every day, standing in the same spot, unmoving, as if the bike was a star in the sky and he was trying to measure the distance between it and everything else in his life. Otis noticed, of course, he always noticed. From behind the counter, pretending to adjust a gear or polish a handlebar, he'd glance up, studying the boy through the grimy glass. At first he assumed Noah would get bored. Most kids did. But this one didn't flinch. Rain or shine, he was there, not asking, not begging, just watching. One sweltering afternoon, the kind where sweat beads along the back before you even step outside, Otis finally stepped out onto the porch of the shop, wiping his hands on a rag that looked older than Noah. "You gonna keep staring at it till it fixes itself?" he muttered, not looking directly at the boy. Noah didn't blink. He pulled his cap a little lower and said softly, I think if I had it I could take my sister somewhere. Anywhere." Otis raised an eyebrow, still not sure whether this kid was slow or sweet. "It don't run," he said flatly. "That seat's busted clean off and the gears slip." Noah nodded. "I know. But I can learn, I can fix it, maybe. I just want to take Lena out. She can't walk far. Her leg's not right. She says it burns when she tries, so she stays in most days. But if I had a bike, with a seat for her, maybe we could see the lake." "She's never been." There was no grand moment of connection, no sudden softening in Otis's face. He didn't say a word, just stared at the boy for a few seconds longer than usual, then turned back inside, the screen door slapping closed behind him. But that night, Otis sat longer in his shop than usual. He looked at that red bike, now almost an old friend, and ran a hand over the dust on its frame. He didn't say it out loud, but something about the way that boy spoke, calm, steady, like he wasn't asking for charity but for a chance, unsettled something deep inside him. And for the first time in years, Otis didn't lock the back room when he left. Something told him tomorrow the boy would be back. And somehow, that felt right. The next day, Noah returned just as Otis expected. Same time, same place, his small frame outlined by the late afternoon sun like a sketch on fading parchment. He didn't say a word, but instead of standing at the window, he walked slowly to the edge of the porch and bent down to pick up a discarded screwdriver. Otis watched him from inside, not moving, not speaking, just letting the silence fill the space between them like motor oil slowly pooling under an old truck. Noah examined the tool for a second, wiped it on his shirt, then gently placed it on the workbench just inside the doorway. Otis gave the boy a look, half suspicion, half curiosity, but said nothing. That small act became the rhythm of their afternoons. Noah never asked to help, never assumed a place inside the shop. He simply hovered, offering quiet hands when Otis reached for a part, sweeping the floor without being told, organizing bolts into small piles like they were puzzle pieces to some greater truth. Otis, for his part, never thanked him. Instead, he offered curt nods and the occasional grunt, his approval wrapped in understatement. Over the next few weeks, Noah began asking questions, not the kind meant to fill air, but real, deliberate questions. Why do some brakes squeal more than others? Why does rust form faster on some metals? Otis didn't volunteer more than necessary, but he noticed something rare. The boy didn't just hear answers, he absorbed them. Like a sponge, or more like a blueprint sketching itself silently behind those steady brown eyes. Some days Noah brought his sketchbook. He never showed Otis the pages directly, but once, when the wind caught a loose sheet and blew it toward the shop's fan, Otis caught a glimpse. A crude but surprisingly detailed drawing of the red bicycle, but modified. Rear seat reinforced, frame slightly lengthened, pedals adjusted for torque. There was a harness belt, too. Safety for the passenger. Otis handed the sheet back without a word, but that night he stared at the bike longer than usual. It wasn't just a rusted frame anymore, it was beginning to look like a promise. Then came the day Lena arrived. It was a Saturday, the kind when the sky sits low and the breeze smells faintly of cut grass and old dreams. Noah's mother had dropped them off on her way to a double shift. Lena sat on the front step, propped up on one crutch, her other leg slightly bent at an unnatural angle, thin and stiff like a branch that had forgotten how to sway. She wore a lavender sundress that didn't quite hide the heavy brace hugging her thigh, and despite the awkwardness of her movement, she smiled with a kind of brightness that made the sun seem lazy. Noah fussed over her quietly, adjusting her cushion, checking her water bottle, until Lena finally waved him off and turned her eyes toward the shop window. "That's the one?" she asked, nodding at the bike. Noah nodded. "One day, I'll make it work." She didn't laugh, didn't doubt him, just looked at the bicycle like it was a rocket ship or a magic carpet or some other beautiful thing made for kids who don't usually get beautiful things. "If you could fix it," she said softly, "would you take me to see the train tracks? The ones past the orchard? Mom says they're too far to walk, but she said they glow sometimes when the sun sets behind them." Noah just nodded again, but Otis, who had been listening from inside, tightened his grip on the wrench in his hand. He didn't know why, but something about that little girl's voice, hopeful but not naive, twisted something sharp in his chest. Later that day, Noah reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 crumpled $1 bills and a handful of change. Without a word, he walked over to an old mason jar sitting on a high shelf in the corner of the shop. It had a piece of masking tape on it. The words "Dream Jar" scribbled in fading Sharpie, left over from some forgotten fundraiser or impulse years ago. Otis had kept it, more out of habit than hope. Noah dropped the money in, and the sound of the coins clinking against glass echoed louder than it should have. "I know it's not much," Noah said, eyes on the jar, "but I'll keep saving. I'm not asking you to give it to me, just maybe don't sell it yet." Otis didn't respond. He didn't need to. He stared at the jar long after the boy had gone, the dust around it disturbed for the first time in years. It sat there like a heartbeat, soft, steady, insistent. And that night, for the first time in as long as he could remember, Otis Turner opened up the back room, pulled out his old tool chest and began sorting through the parts that still had some life left in them, because something about that kid, about those 2 kids, made the old man wonder if maybe, just maybe, not everything rusted with time. Some things just waited for the right hands. It happened on a Thursday, the kind of day that didn't warn you it was about to shift something. The sky was pale and indifferent, and the breeze carried the dry smell of dust from the nearby rail yard. Noah showed up after school, just like always, a little sweaty from the walk, the usual sketchbook tucked under one arm. He stepped onto the porch of Turner & Sons like it was a ritual. Right foot first, then a soft knock on the doorframe. But the moment his eyes landed on the front window, everything changed. The bike, his bike, was gone. The corner where it had leaned for months was empty, the dust outline of its frame still clinging to the wall like a ghost. Noah froze, unable to move forward or back. His throat tightened, as if his voice had been stolen along with the bike. Otis was at his usual place behind the counter, polishing a chainring with a rag that had seen better years. He didn't look up right away. When he finally did, his eyes didn't hold the usual flicker of knowing. They were flat, almost tired. "Sold it this morning," he said, wiping grease from his knuckles. "Guy came by early, offered cash, said he liked old frames, took it on the spot." Noah stood there, trying to process the words like they were in another language. He nodded once, slowly, then glanced at the dream jar on the shelf. The money was still there, his dollars, his coins, a summer's worth of belief. "I thought maybe I was going to fix it, for my sister," he murmured, barely audible. Otis didn't answer. His hands kept moving. Noah nodded again, more to himself this time. "Right," he said, his voice sharper now, tighter. "Of course, someone came first." And with that he turned and walked off the porch, each step heavier than the last, as if gravity had suddenly remembered him. Otis watched him go. His eyes lingered on the boy's back, the slope of his shoulders, the way his hands curled into fists but didn't rise. When the screen door creaked closed behind him, Otis sighed, deep and quiet, like an old hinge giving in. The truth was, there had been no buyer, no early morning visitor. The bike hadn't been sold. It had been moved. Tucked into the back behind the curtains, already disassembled, already halfway into becoming something new. Otis had planned it all, silently, methodically. But what he hadn't planned was the look in Noah's eyes when he saw that empty space, that quiet devastation that came not from anger, but from the cruel, familiar sting of not being chosen. That night, Otis sat alone in the shop long after closing, a single bulb swinging overhead, casting slow-moving shadows across the workbench. The red frame lay bare across the table, stripped and sanded, its rusted joints now silvered with the promise of new welding. Next to it were carefully laid out components: new pedals, a reinforced backrest, a padded seat wide enough for a small girl with a crooked leg to sit without pain. There was even a hand-sewn strap Otis had stitched himself, fumbling with the needle like a fool until he got it right. He'd planned to surprise the boy. Make it a birthday gift, no speeches, no signatures. Just leave it where Noah would find it, with a note from a friend. But now, with the image of the boy's wounded silence still hanging in the air like smoke, Otis wasn't so sure anymore. In his mind, he heard Lena's voice from that Saturday. "If you could fix it, would you take me to see the train tracks?" And it hit him harder than he expected. Because some kids didn't ask for miracles. They asked for motion, for a way to move forward in a world that kept trying to keep them still. Otis knew what it was like to stand still, to let years pile up like dust. Maybe he couldn't change the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could help a kid move through it. So he kept working, quietly, tirelessly. The next few nights blurred into each other, cutting, welding, painting, adjusting. The shop smelled like polish and old rubber, like sweat and stubborn hope. By the time he tightened the last bolt, his hands ached in a way that felt almost sacred. The bicycle was no longer a relic. It was a gift. But not just any gift. A chance. A message wrapped in chrome and compassion, and it had to be delivered just right. No fanfare, no credit, just a small miracle left on a doorstep, waiting to be found. It was Sunday morning when the knock came, 3 soft taps against the front door of the Carter home, just as the sun was beginning to rise over the rooftops of Greenville. The sky was painted in hushed tones of peach and violet, the kind of colors that whispered instead of shouted, and the air still carried the cool breath of dawn. Noah's mother, already half-dressed for her morning shift, opened the door to find a large object wrapped in an old gray tarp, resting on the front step. There was no one in sight, just the stillness of the street and a faint scent of grease and pine drifting in the air, like something had been waiting in the shadows and slipped away the moment it was seen. Noah was in the kitchen, rinsing out a bowl, when he heard her call his name. Low, surprised, not quite alarmed, but not casual either. He rushed to the door, and when he saw it he stopped cold. The tarp was tied neatly at the bottom with twine, no name, no card, just a folded piece of paper tucked under the knot. Noah reached for it with cautious hands, his breath caught in his throat, heart thudding like a hammer against his ribs. He unfolded the note, read it once, then again and again. The handwriting was firm, slanted, not familiar, but intentional. It said only, "The world needs more movement, not permission. Happy birthday, Noah. A friend." His hands trembled as he untied the twine and peeled back the tarp, inch by inch, like unwrapping something sacred. And there it was, the red bicycle. Except it wasn't just the same bike anymore. It was reborn. The frame gleamed with a fresh coat of crimson paint that shimmered like wet brick in the morning light. The tires were thick, the treads deep and ready for road or dirt, and the chain glinted with fresh oil. But what made Noah stop, what made his knees go weak for a second, was the seat. The back half of the bike had been extended with a custom-made seat wide enough for Lena, complete with padded backrest, side handles, and foot supports fitted with adjustable straps. Everything had been thought of, every detail seen. There was even a small horn at the front shaped like a yellow duck, silly and gentle, tied with a little purple ribbon. Noah didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Lena was already behind him, her crutch tapping gently against the floor. Her mouth fell open when she saw the bike, eyes wide and unblinking, like she couldn't quite believe it was real. "Is it? For us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Noah nodded slowly, still stunned. Yeah, it is." He crouched to her level, adjusted the foot straps without being asked, lifted her gently into the seat. She sat up straighter than she ever had, her little hands gripping the side rails, face flushed with pure, quiet joy. She didn't ask who sent it. She didn't have to. In that moment, belief was enough. Their mother stood at the doorway, hand to her mouth, eyes glassy with something that felt bigger than gratitude. She said nothing, only nodded once, silently giving permission that had never needed to be asked. And then Noah climbed on, testing the balance, gripping the handlebars, the familiar weight of responsibility steady beneath his hands, but now, for once, lightened by something close to hope. He looked back at Lena. "Ready?" he asked. She beamed. "Let's go." They started slowly, the tires crunching over the gravel in front of the porch, turning left onto Maple Street, then right onto Granger. Neighbors looked up from porches, from car hoods, from front yards and garden hoses, watching the two of them ride by. Noah pedaling with quiet strength, Lena sitting tall behind him, her dress flaring slightly in the breeze. Someone waved. Someone else clapped. But Noah didn't see any of it. All he saw was the road stretching ahead, the sun cresting higher behind the rooftops, and Lena's hair catching the wind like the tail of a kite finally let loose. They didn't stop until they reached the orchard, the one with the abandoned train tracks that Lena had once only dreamed about. They sat there for a long time, under the swaying trees, the wheels still spinning slightly, as if even the bike couldn't bear to stop moving. Back in town, Otis watched from the edge of his porch, hidden behind the slats of an old screen door. He didn't smile. He rarely did. But his jaw softened and he leaned a little heavier on the door frame, as if letting himself carry less weight for once. The shop was closed that day, but the key still hung from his belt, and the dream jar still sat in the window, half full, catching morning light, like it had waited years to be noticed. He didn't need thanks, didn't need credit. All he needed was that image. Two kids rolling down a street that had once kept them still, now carried forward by nothing more than a handful of coins, an old man's hands, and a belief that sometimes kindness was just as important as air. 10 years passed, the way summers always do in small towns. Quietly, then all at once. Greenville didn't change much in that time. The streets cracked a little more. The paint on the old water tower faded from sky blue to something closer to silver gray, and the train tracks near the orchard were finally swallowed up by weeds and time. But some things didn't fade. Some memories stayed carved into the pavement, into hearts, into the way certain corners still felt sacred. For Noah Carter, that memory had always been red. He came back on a Tuesday in early June, his backpack slung over one shoulder, the collar of his shirt still creased from the drive down from the city. He was taller now, lean but strong, the kind of young man who walked with quiet purpose, with the calm confidence of someone who had carried more weight than most and never dropped it. His eyes were still sharp, still dark and observant, but now there was something else behind them, a kind of gratitude that had learned how to live in silence. He stopped at the corner of Maple and Granger first, where he and Lena used to turn during their weekend rides. The sidewalk was more broken now, and the magnolia tree they always passed had been cut down, but the echo of that summer still lived there. He could almost see the flash of her lavender dress in the wind, the crutch leaning on the porch steps, the way her laughter had lifted in the air like birds startled into flight. Then he made his way to the shop. Turner & Sons was no longer open. The windows were boarded halfway up, and the rusted sign swayed slightly in the breeze like it was still trying to remember the name of the man who once gave it purpose. But the front porch remained. The wood was splintered, but the steps still creaked in the same places. Noah climbed them slowly, each footfall a note in a song only he could hear. He stood before the door, unsure if he expected someone to answer, unsure why he felt nervous. Then he stepped to the side window and peered in. The inside hadn't changed much. Tools still hung along the pegboard wall, covered in dust. The counter, though weathered, still bore the faint oil stains of decades of repairs. And there, on the back shelf, was the jar, the dream jar, still sitting in its spot like it had waited for him. He tried the door. It opened with a groan that sounded more like a sigh. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old rubber and quiet time. He walked carefully, as though afraid to disturb the stillness, until he reached the jar. Taped to the inside of the glass was a folded piece of yellowed paper. He unscrewed the lid and pulled it out, careful not to tear it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Otis's, firm, slanted, deliberate. "If the boy comes back, give him this. He'll understand." Noah's throat tightened. He looked around the shop, but the silence felt fuller now, like it held something. He sat on the stool behind the counter, the same one Otis used to sit on when pretending not to watch him work. He unfolded the paper and read the note beneath the first line. Some kids dream out loud. This one dreamed with his hands. "I didn't fix that bike for charity. I fixed it because I saw something in that boy that I thought I'd lost in myself. I didn't know if he'd remember. But if he does, tell him the world owes him nothing, and still, it waits for his footprints." Noah sat there for a long time, holding the note in his lap like a relic, staring at the dust particles dancing in the sunlight. Otis had passed away 3 years ago, he'd learned from the town clerk when he first drove in. No obituary, no ceremony. Just a short mention in the town records: Otis Turner, bicycle repairman, 19452019. But this note, this space, this memory, that was the eulogy Otis had left behind. Noah stood, carefully placed the note back inside the jar, and closed the lid. Then he walked to the workbench, reached for a nearby wrench, and ran his fingers along its edge. He didn't take it. He didn't need to. Some legacies weren't meant to be pocketed, they were meant to be carried. As he stepped out onto the porch again, the sky overhead began to darken with a gathering storm, but Noah didn't run. He looked down the street, toward the direction of the orchard, and smiled. Not because of what had been lost, but because of what had been found. Somewhere behind him, the wind rattled the loose edge of the Turner & Sons sign, and for just a second it sounded almost like a laugh. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.